Okay, so let's dive into this conversation around what to do when your partner doesn't want to do the work. So I really do just want to emphasize how common and normal this is. So to the extent that you're in that kind of dynamic and you're feeling really frustrated and really isolated and maybe feeling powerless or hopeless, maybe you're wondering if this means you shouldn't be with this person and it shouldn't be so hard and why don't they care? All of those stories are really understandable and I've certainly been there. But I do just want to emphasize that it's very, very common. I think in most cases you will have one partner who's more keen and one partner who's more resistant. And that doesn't have to mean anything in and of itself. It's just that we often find ourselves in those sorts of dynamics. Obviously, with the attachment overlay, we can see that someone who leans more anxious is likely to be very invested in wanting to do the work. Oftentimes, I would argue from a place of almost of fear and seeking to feel in control. Because if we're constantly talking about the relationship and improving it and all of that, we're plugging all the holes in the ship all the time and then nothing can ever happen. We're like proactively problem solving and protecting the relationship at all costs. And it's not to say that that's a bad trait, but I think it's really important, no matter where you sit on the spectrum of willingness to do work in your relationship, it's good to be self-aware and it's good to reflect on what's this really about for me. Is this a values thing? And I think that's a completely valid values thing. Or is this an insecurity and a fear thing? Or maybe it's some combination of those. And just sifting through that so that we can come to these conversations in our relationships with a lot of self-awareness and a lot of self-responsibility that allows us to meet our partner in kind of honesty and vulnerability rather than attack and blame and projection, which I think is what can happen when we feel frustrated and exasperated and we make the other person the problem, right? We say, you're the reason that we're like this because I want to do the work and you're the roadblock, you're the impasse. So you just have to change and then everything will be fine. I think we can really easily fall into that kind of story and project that in a way that, spoiler alert, tends not to work very well and tends to lead to more resistance in the other person, quite understandably. So what do we do with this, with a partner who's really resistant? I think that, as with all things, I know how frustrating it is, but it's really can be very helpful to get curious about the source of their resistance, right? So rather than just making them wrong for their resistance and their reluctance to do the work, go, okay, what might this signify to you? What is it about working on our relationship that feels threatening to you in some way, or that feels unsafe, or that scares you or stresses you out? And for a lot of people with more avoidant patterns, the idea of needing to work on a relationship is maybe quite foreign, or at the very least quite intensely vulnerable, because particularly if you've been in a relationship dynamic where the status quo is having these big, long, heavy emotional conversations for 3 hours where you spin around in circles. And for someone who leans more towards avoidant patterns, that is likely to be a very emotionally exhausting experience that they're going to have a lot of resistance to. Again, quite understandably. And so they might think of doing more work on your relationship as being tantamount to signing up for more of that. So getting curious, what is working on the relationship? What does that mean to you? What does that look like to you? And what does it signify or symbolize? What does it mean about our relationship to you if we are doing work on it? For some people, and I think this is hopefully becoming less true now, I think there's cultural shifts taking place, but certainly a more old-fashioned view would be that you shouldn't have to talk about it or work on it. And I think that some more avoidant folks can have the perspective of, if it's that much work, it's not worth it. And that just means that something's broken, it's not a good fit. So I'll just go find someone else where that work isn't required, and that is my solution. And there are people who are more than happy to be in a relationship for years, decades, a lifetime, and not do this kind of work. So it's not wrong, but it's just finding compatibility in that respect. And I think for a lot of people nowadays, and certainly I know for probably the majority of people listening to this podcast, there is a desire to grow in relationship, and there is a desire to deepen emotionally and to not just get by, but to really thrive in love together. And I think that's a beautiful thing to value and to fight for. So I think that all of that to say, it can be really helpful to get clear for each of you on what the work means. And if there's some confusion there or you're faced with resistance, maybe you could share with a partner that I'm not doing this because I think that this is broken and you're doing something wrong and I'm trying to change you, or any other stories that you think you might need to dismantle. But really, because I love our relationship and I really want to invest in it in the same way that I'd invest in any other part of my life that I really valued and wanted to nurture. You do exercise to take care of your health, or you would take lessons in dance if you wanted to learn to be a better dancer. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong there or that we need to get defensive or protective of the thing. But I think oftentimes we have all of these really unrealistic expectations of how easy relationships should be, and that if you are doing work together, if you're going to couples counseling, if you're having big talks about your feelings, or if you're reading a relationship book or doing a course together, that means that there's something wrong and that you're failing. And I think for some people more than others, that can be a real point of sensitivity and can bring up a lot of stuff, and it can bring up a lot of those defense mechanisms that we can see, whether that's avoidance or denial or projection or any number of things that basically deflect away from the need to look deeper.